Good day, everyone. We are Group 9 from the ABF Parallel Critical Thinking class, and our presentation explores the topic, if critical thinking is so critical to development, why do people, even the educated, find it difficult to think critically? Critical thinking is defined as the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue to form a well-reasoned judgment. Although it is essential for solving problems, making good decisions, and promoting individual and national development, many people, even the educated, still struggle to think critically. Our argument is that these happen because of cognitive biases, social influences, and limitations in education. Throughout this presentation, we'll explain these barriers and suggest ways to overcome them.
The case of critical thinking. The case of critical thinking talks about how essential critical thinking is to an individual and the society as a whole. Scholars such as John Dewey, Harvey Siegel, Richard Paul, and Linda Elder stress on the importance of critical thinking to an individual and the society. The following are the importance of critical thinking as identified by the scholars listed above. 1. John Dewey. According to John Dewey, critical thinking is about reflective thinking. Dewey felt that people should not accept anything unquestioningly, rather, they should critically analyze the evidence and experiences before coming to any conclusion. According to John Dewey, education should encourage questioning and problem solving rather than memorizing facts. It is through critical thinking that individuals become active participants and responsible citizens in a democratic society. Harvey Siegel. Harvey Siegel argued that critical thinking is an important aspect of rationality. He believed that a critical thinker is an individual who can analyze reason, evaluate arguments, and make decisions based on evidence. Siegel emphasized that education should develop students' ability to think independently and just their beliefs with sound reasoning. He considered critical thinking as a key goal of education because it promotes intellectual autonomy and informed decision-making. 3. Richard Paul and Linda Elder. Richard Paul and Linda Elder created widely used framework of critical thinking. They defined it as the focused process of actively analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information. Their model highlights important standards like clarity, accuracy, relevance, logic, and fairness. They argue that critical thinking helps people overcome biases, improve their problem-solving skills, and make better decisions in personal, academic, and professional contexts.
The name is Bryce Ej Apia, a first-year student studying accounting, banking, and finance at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. I will share a streamlined approach of cognitive and psychological barriers. Critical things are mainly caused by how our mind naturally processes information. Daniel Kahneman explored how people think and make decisions using mental shortcuts, that's heuristic, and automatic thinking. He then developed the dual process theory, which explains that there are two systems of thinking, that's system 1 and system 2. System 1 talks about fast thinking, how people think quick, automatically how people think, emotionally how people think. For example, 2 times 2. Immediately you hear 2 times 2, the answer just comes in mind. There is no need for you to take calculator and calculate 2 times 2. This makes it fast thinking. System 2 is slow thinking, which talks about how people think carefully, logically how people think, deliberately how people think. For instance, 178 times 48. For this, you have to take calculator and calculate. It deals with step-by-step approach. Kahneman showed that people often rely on fast thinking, which uses heuristic to make rapid decisions quickly. Daniel also exploits mental shortcuts and automatic thinking. Here we are emphasizing on heuristic. He said they are quick ways the brain uses to make decisions without much effort, but they can sometimes lead to errors in judgment instead of carefully facts. People rely on shortcuts, which can lead to wrong conclusion. For instance, a guy on a lab coat, you assume he is a scientist, but he could be an actor. Thank you.
Moving on to cognitive biases, we see there are errors in thinking that affect our judgments. And scholars called David Dunning and Justin Kruger explored how lack of knowledge and skills lead to a person to overestimate his or her competence or ability. They also explored a phenomenon called the Dunning-Kruger effect. With the Dunning-Kruger effect, they said it occurs when a person with little knowledge and skills overestimates or thinks they know much more than they actually do. Example, a student learns for 1 hour before an examination. Because of the 1 hour learning, he or she thinks he knows everything, but at the end of the examination, they perform poorly. The reason why it is Dunning-Kruger effect is that they lack the ability to recognize their mistakes, or they lack the ability or they overestimate their competence. 2. Emotional reason. As it explains itself, emotional reason, it said it occurs when a person thinks their emotions are facts. Instead of relying on evidence, they rely on their emotions. Example, a student have a few minutes for a presentation to be done. Because he or she feels nervous, they think they are unprepared. So the reason why it is called emotional reason is that they always think their emotions are facts. 3. Confirmation biases. It explains that a person always, the reason it is confirmation biases is that a person always find evidence that goes in favor of their facts. Instead of picking another evidence, they always find evidence that goes in favor of theirs. Example, I always think online learning is ineffective. Instead of moving out to pick another evidence to compare and see that maybe it is true or false, because it will go beyond mine, I will never do that. All these biases are the reason why educated people find it difficult to think critically.
Education is often viewed as the primary route for intellectual development. However, most educational systems do not consistently cultivate critical thinking skills. There are things in school that get in the way of critical thinking. These things makes it hard for students to look at information, figure out what is true, solve problems, make their decisions. This happens when teachers focus on memorization instead of helping students to think critically for themselves. One big problem is when students just memorize things without understanding. Educational philosopher Paulo Freire did not like the way students were taught, where they just sat and listened to the teacher. He thought this was bad because it did not allow students to ask questions, be creative, or think critically. It made them rely on the teacher for thinking for themselves. This culture of rote learning limited the development of independent, reasoned thinking.
Social barriers are the influences, expectations and pressures from families, peers and culture that make critical thinking difficult by discouraging independent thinking and questioning. People are not allowed to think in isolation, rather shape their opinions and beliefs in accordance with the social group they belong to often keep them in social acceptance. Human beings naturally seek acceptance from others around them, and hence, when their views differ from other people in their social groups, they tend to suppress their own reasoning to avoid exclusion and criticism. This causes them to fear being judged and discouraged if they disagree, also causing them to agree with popular opinions instead of evaluating evidence. Many cultures teach people to respect authority figures. While respect for authority figures is important, it can weaken critical thinking. It prevents people from questioning authority figures, especially when it comes to their actions and inactions. Ridicule, rejection, and loss of opportunities are also social consequences people fear, and as a result, many fear expressing critical opinions. For example, an employee might notice flaws in a company's decision-making process, but remain quiet to avoid conflict with superiors. Lastly, modern social media platforms have created new social barriers to critical thinking by exposing their users to one-sided information, reinforcing existing beliefs, and also spreading misinformation. Education alone may not protect individuals from misinformation if they consume information uncritically.
Why education does not guarantee critical thinking. Education is the process of gaining knowledge, skills, and attitude that transform how you think. It is grouped into two, formal and informal education, whereas critical thinking is a skill of thinking clearly and reasonably, as defined by Matthew Lipman. Being educated doesn't mean that an individual is a critical thinker. A critical thinker is someone that asks how, why, before jumping into conclusion. Nevertheless, in our various societies, people that had the privilege to be educated are the people that are most valued and recognized. They are seen in certain cases or situations as final and seen as the best and only solution due to their educated experience. Carol Dweck, a psychologist, further explained how education alone is insufficient.
Carol Dweck, a psychologist, further explained how education alone is insufficient and how a person who is only educated has a fixed mindset. Therefore, this individual is unready to accept correction and challenges. He therefore thinks that what he or she has learned already is correct and doesn't need any amendments. A critical thinker deliberates and scrutinizes before taking actions and considers the end result. He refuses to be biased and always listens to feedbacks and suggestions from others, never minding being corrected. That is seen as a person with a grown mindset. Richard Paul and Linda Elder argue that virtues such as humility, empathy, fair-mindedness are key and essential because they improve critical thinking. Education provides knowledge and expertise, whilst critical thinking adds qualities such as humility and open-mindedness.
Pathways forward. The pathways forward enlightens us on how to encourage the development of critical thinking among individuals and the society. Critical thinking can be developed by encouraging people to ask questions, think independently, and discuss ideas openly. Schools should be focused on problem solving and understanding rather than memorization, which encourages rote learning among students. People should learn to check facts carefully before accepting information as true. Being curious, learning from mistakes, and keeping an open mind. Individuals can make better decisions and solve problems more effectively. Creating a culture that values learning, reflection, and respect. Discuss helps build strong critical thinking skills in both education and society.
In conclusion, although critical thinking is widely recognized as essential for development, many people, including the educated, find it difficult to practice. Cognitive biases, emotional reasoning, social pressures, and educational systems that prioritize memorization over analysis all contribute to these challenges. Moreover, formal education alone does not guarantee critical thinking because genuine critical inquiry requires intellectual humility, openness to evidence, and a commitment to rational reflection. Therefore, overcoming these barriers requires reforms in education, greater media literacy, and the cultivation of habits that support reflective and independent thinking. Only through such efforts can individuals and societies fully realize development benefits of critical thinking. Thank you.